Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to this dialogue between Thomas Frank and Paul Krugman. This is part of the Robert L. Hess residency, Scholar in Residence, which has been occupied this year by Thomas Frank. Paul Krugman, as you know, is joining us at CUNY, and his visit here is a good sign for us. I'm not going to take time to give long introductions, or really any introductions, because Thomas Frank has been introduced about a dozen times already this week, and I suspect, and there is also a bio of him in his in the program of the event. Has proved to be an incredibly engaging and astute observer of all of the things with which he engages and studies. And Paul Krugman, what can you say about Paul Krugman that the Nobel Committee didn't already say? One of my colleagues this morning said, Paul Krugman is my sign that there is still sanity in the world. And I think that's probably the best thing you can say. So I leave it to them. There will be a dialogue between them for about an hour, and then we'll take questions from the floor. There are two mics, I believe, aren't there two? Is there one over there? So you should line up at the mics when the time comes. All right.
Should I start? Yeah, get this thing going. Howdy, folks. So can you all hear me? Okay. I want to say, first of all, what an incredible honor it is to have Paul Krugman here. He is the newspaper columnist I admire most in this country. And I mean, for so many years, you were in fact, the only sane voice out there. I mean, when the financial crisis and the bailouts were going on, oh my God, yeah. That was a bad time. But there was Paul Krugman in the New York Times, the man who understood. So we're here today to talk about the Barack Obama legacy, the legacy of the Obama administration. How will history judge President Obama? This is going to be the hot topic for the next 2 years, and you can all say that you were there when people first started talking about it in the build-up to the Barack Obama Museum down in the south side of Chicago. And I should start off by saying when they talk about people who had really high hopes for Barack Obama's presidency and then were disappointed with him, I'm the guy we're talking about. I thought he was the most wonderful politician to come down the pike in a really long time, and I've been progressively more and more disappointed as the years have gone by, although I constantly, I hold out hope for him to, do something wonderful, and I still think he's got it in him to be one of the greats. But before I start, running off a list of things that he's done wrong, I want to start off by talking about the way that he's been better than basically any other president since I was born, which was now 50 years ago, 1965. I mean, there's no Vietnam War. He hasn't screwed things up in some gigantic way. No Watergate, no Iran-Contra, no Monica Lewinsky, no Iraq War. And this is not, negligible. This is not nothing. This is nothing to sneeze at. The man ended the Iraq War. That is huge, in my opinion. He did get a form of universal health insurance passed. He got a big stimulus bill passed. Not big enough, but compare it to the one that Bill Clinton got passed in 1993, which was, nothing. This is really something. But I think that the way you have to judge a president's legacy, a president's time in office, is not by some abstract comparison, to former inhabitants of the Oval Office, but by relationship to the challenges of the time. And what are the challenges of our time? We all know what the first one is. It's inequality. We all understand that this is out of control. The president himself talks about it. The single great challenge of our age. We all know that the trends in this direction are sweeping our little bateau of state right towards that roaring cataract they call oligarchy. And there are a lot of things that President Obama could have done over the years, especially in the beginning of his administration, to address this problem. Do you remember when he first started? Remember what organized labor wanted above all other things from the president? They called it the Employee Free Choice Act, EFCA, or a card check is another way of putting it. And that bill, or some variation on it, some compromise on that bill, would have allowed organized labor to make some kind of comeback in this country and would have helped a lot, I think, to bend the inequality curve. Restoring the estate tax would have been a good idea. Not negotiating any more free trade deals would have helped. My friend Bill Black, who's probably the nation's most famous former banking regulator, once wrote to me that had Obama gone after the bankers in a more resolute way, had he discredited the banks and the bankers by means of prosecuting a few of them, the administration would have enormously increased the political space for real reforms on executive compensation. And this is a huge deal. I mean, one of the reasons that the banks behaved the way they did is it's the same reason that executive compensation has gone so stratospheric, right? It's the bonus culture on Wall Street. And this was responsible for that epidemic of fraud in the last decade that brought on the financial crisis. So let me put the Obama years into context like this. In my opinion, what the Times called for when he came into office in 2009, what the Times called for was a second New Deal, for a wholesale makeover of the economic system. And what Barack Obama chose to emphasize instead was a second round of 90s style bipartisanship, or that's what he wanted to get. He never quite got it, but that's what he wanted. He looked out over a nation that had been laid low by epic white-collar misbehavior and decided that what we really needed was for politicians in Washington to get along with one another. And to me, when I saw this happening, I couldn't believe it. It was like an almost inconceivable blunder. It was like a category mistake. But it was also a misstep very much in keeping with the culture of Washington, D.C., the city where I live now, the sort of centrist consensus that you're always coming up against in that city. And we're probably going to talk about this some more later. This is something I can talk about for hours and hours. It drives me crazy. So what happened is the financial crisis, we let a good crisis go to waste. Remember that line? Was that was Rahm Emanuel. We let a good crisis go to waste, and our smart young president let an era of possibility slip through his fingers. And I think the cost of missing that opportunity is impossible to measure. Second thing, the second great issue of our time, the banks. The recent episode that I'm describing, the financial crisis and the bailouts that I started talking about, this is the great economic and political debacle of our time. This is the perfect expression of everything that is wrong with this country and everything that's been going wrong for decades. Everything that's been wrong with us for decades in one episode, and still the Democrats couldn't really figure out how to handle it in a way that was very much different from those despicable Republicans. I'm referring to the bailouts here. I mean, not only did our Democratic administration leave Wall Street standing after Wall Street plunged the country into, and the whole world, in fact, into a slump without parallel in most people's lives, but the government allowed Wall Street to grow more concentrated and more powerful than ever. They made it plain, this is the part that just drives me up the wall, they made it plain that there are to be no consequences for Wall Street's misbehavior, that the bonuses are always going to flow, that the obvious fraudsters are never going to be prosecuted, that this one industry essentially stands above the law. To say that Obama fumbled this issue is to understate the matter, I think. More to the point is the big question of why he fumbled it so dramatically. I want to go over the historical record very briefly here, and I want to point out it was fully within President Obama's power to react to the financial crisis in a more aggressive and appropriate way. The laws were there, the laws were in place, there was all sorts of precedent going back to the 1930s. Nobody forced him to choose Tim Geithner to run the bailouts or Eric Holder to run the Department of Justice or to re-up Ben Bernanke at the Fed. Second of all, it would have been good policy had Obama reacted to the financial crisis in a more aggressive and appropriate way. And what I mean when I say that is that the economy would probably have recovered more quickly, and more importantly, the danger of some repeat crisis in the future brought on by concentrated financial power would have been reduced, minimized. And thirdly, think about if he had done this, okay? If he had done what I'm describing, this would have been massively popular. Do you remember the public adulation for Barack Obama back in 2008, 2009? I was on a book tour in 2008, and when I used to refer to him, he wasn't elected yet, he was a senator at the time, and when I used to refer to him as President Obama, people would cheer. They loved this man. This was Roosevelt. Here he was, this was Roosevelt on his way. Had he reacted to the financial crisis in a more aggressive and appropriate way, he'd still be that man. And I think everyone knows this, and everyone admits this, at least tacitly, even the architects of Obama's bailout policies, who like to think of themselves as having, wisely resisted the public's mindless baying for banker blood, right? And lastly, acting aggressively on this front might have deflated the kind of rampant false consciousness that you've got in this country, I'm referring to the Tea Party movement here, might have prevented the Republican reconquista of Congress or the House and then the Senate. So everything was pointing in that direction, but Barack Obama did the opposite. He did the opposite. He did everything he could to foam the runways. Remember that phrase? This is something that Tim Geithner said. Well, we'll get into that later. He did everything he could to foam the runways for the banks, make their landing more easy. Never showed any real interest in taking these guys on. I mean, I'm going to go over the list one more time, and hopefully this will be the last time I ever have to talk about the financial crisis and the bailouts. But think about it. These sort of catastrophic bailouts that he failed to unwind, that the Bush administration had done, the bad regulators that he didn't fire, the AIG bonuses that his team actually went out on television and defended, the cram downs that he never pushed for, putting the zombie banks into receivership, which he never did, never happened, the FBI agents that he never shifted over to investigating white-collar crime, the criminal referral programs that we used to have at all the regulatory agencies that were never restored, that were abolished a couple of years ago and have never been brought back. I mean, the executives of the bailed out banks that were never fired, the standing outrage of institutions that we call too big to fail, and now too big to jail too. The top bankers that were never prosecuted for anything on this long, long, long list of apparent frauds. Now, Obama didn't play this greatest of all issues the way he did because, the white working class rose up to defend its pals on Wall Street. That's not why he did it. And he didn't play it this way because forcing Republicans to defend Wall Street would have been really bad politics. And he didn't do it the way he did because the presidency lacks sufficient power. Everything I just mentioned can be done by the president. All it takes, as again my friend Bill Black says, is some will and some imagination and some planning and some determination. So what I'm suggesting, and this is the thing that I think we Americans will increasingly have to get our minds around as we examine the Obama legacy, is that the financial crisis played out the way it did because Obama and his team wanted it to play out that way. I think that is the simplest and the most direct explanation. We, scientific, hard-headed types down in Washington, D.C. are fond of, these sort of structural explanations for what goes on in the Capitol, and we're drawn to these complicated roundabout theories whose main virtue is that they get our heroes off the hook. But come on. It's time to turn our scrutiny on those heroes as well, and time to think about the power that money holds over the Democratic Party as well as the Republicans. And it's time to look at, historically, the victory of a determined laissez-faire faction within the Democratic Party over the larger organization. You know what I'm talking about here, right? You remember the Democratic Leadership Council? I mean, and let's ask ourselves, whatever became, Dr. Viscusi and I have been talking about this all week, whatever became of the great social movements of the left in this country? And why did their allies in Washington fail them when their crisis came? Skip some of this stuff. The last challenge of Barack Obama's presidency that I want to talk about is the right. the conservative movement. These guys were flat on their back in 2008. Remember, after George Bush had totally discredited conservatism in the Republican Party, you had the Abramoff scandals, Hurricane Katrina, the Iraq War, and then the financial crisis. It was a disaster. This party's brand was badly tarnished. I mean, their ideas were discredited, their time was obviously up. You had all of these articles saying things like, the age of Reagan is finally over, conservatism is finished. I mean, and it wasn't until a few months it was 1 month exactly, into the Obama administration that these guys figured out a way to bring their movement back, right? By stepping outside the Republican Party and calling themselves the Tea Party. We'll talk about that too. I have some funny anecdotes. And they managed to reorganize themselves by pretending to oppose the great deeds of the Bush administration, Hank Paulson's bank bailouts, right? And President Obama's unfortunate embrace of the same. That's what they did. That's how the Tea Party got going in the early days. And you look back over the history of the Tea Party and over the Republican, campaign of the sort of, this throwback to the Gingrich era of complete intransigence in Congress. And it's amazing how quickly these guys bounced back from their disgrace. But I'm also amazed at how poorly Obama and his, tough guy Chicago advisors responded to this challenge. I mean, could they really not see what was happening? That they were going to go back to the old Gingrich strategy of obstructionism? I mean, did they never give any serious thought to coming up with a way to cross-pressure the Tea Party movement and make their ideology slightly more complicated for them? And does it never occur to the leadership of the Democratic Party in Washington that, turning over economic policy to these arrogant Wall Street types, these revolving door types, might just stoke public outrage? Now look, obviously Obama has been victim number one of the resurgent right, but as the leader of the Democratic Party, he's also responsible for coming up with a way to beat these guys. And again, I once thought he was exactly the right man for the job, because the fuel of the conservative movement is this, disgust with government and with Washington that never goes away. And while the conservative movement was flat on its back in 2008, that disgust was still out there simmering below the surface. Okay, so Obama comes in and continues the Bush administration's bailouts, and the Wall Street bailouts basically blasted the concept of government accountability to dust, to pieces, right? I mean, and his Justice Department has made absolutely sure that we got the message, right? Too big to jail. Some people are just too smart and too powerful to confront. Yeah, you and I have to live according to the law, but, there was an article in the paper the other day, a member of Eric Holder's team was whining that they didn't try to prosecute because these Wall Street guys are geniuses. He called them masters of financial rocket science, right? They can't go up against that stuff. Look, I have written 3 books about American conservatism, and it is a lot of fun to make fun of these guys. I love doing it. I've spent years doing it. It's my bread and butter is mocking conservatives, right? And these guys, they're hilarious. They blow off the facts when they feel like it. They swipe symbolism from the other side. They illustrate arguments on economics with fairy tales, and they really do that. I mean, the reasoning you hear, if you go outside and turn on the Glenn Beck radio program, the reasoning you hear is like something from a brainwashing session at Lubyanka prison, right? I mean, it is preposterous. It is contemptible. But do you know what it's better than? It's better than nothing. And I want to remind you one more time about these political cataclysms that poison our every political moment, the financial crisis and the bailouts. And remember, the culprits of these cataclysms, by which I mean the people who wrecked the economy of the entire world, these people were not punished for what they did. These people were rewarded. And when I say they were rewarded, I don't mean like they got away with a slap on the wrist. I mean they were laden down with billions and our blessings. And today they are rich in a way that you and I will never be able to understand. And all of this happened courtesy of our government, the officials of which who've conducted themselves ever since as though nothing, really improper happened at all. Don't worry about it, nothing to see here, everything's under control, the bailout money will be recouped, they say. Leave it to us, the experts understand these things. Now listen, you could not have contrived a scenario better calculated to destroy public faith in American institutions. I mean, what is the point of hard work, of scrapping for a few dollars more at some lousy hourly wage when dishonest financial legerdemain is so profitable? Why play by the rules when they obviously don't apply to everyone? When louts and bullies and crooks take home society's greatest rewards. Look, the bailouts created the perfect situation for populism in the old tradition of the 19th century, right? For what we call in Kansas calamity howlers, for Jeremiahs raging against the corrupt and the powerful. And one of our two political factions, as we've seen, took to this task immediately and with relish, and they tossed Republican leaders overboard, and they declared war on what they call the ruling class, and yes, they love to use this term, the ruling class, and they assembled with their megaphones out in the park, and they gave voice to the people's outrage. But the other faction, the actual descendants of Bryan and Truman and Roosevelt, couldn't see it coming, couldn't rise to the occasion. They didn't seem to understand that the circumstances called for something different this time. They could not embrace the requirements of the moment, even though responding to hard times used to be their party's reason for being. Look, folks, the right wing ate our lunch. They stole our thunder. And we need to understand why the party of experts and the party of the people let it happen. Thank you very much.
So we actually have a lot of common ground, but I want to, but also some big differences. And so first thing I think I want to say, Tom, if you came in 2008, thought that Barack Obama was the progressive leader of your dreams, you were not paying attention, right? Go back and read what I was writing all through the Democratic Party. He was then what you now complain of him being. He was then more what you now complain of him being than he is now. He was very much our problem is partisan divisions. I can transcend partisanship. I can bring us together. And I was concerned, actually, if you looked at his actual policy proposals of the three contenders, he was the furthest right. He had the more conservative positions on lots of things. He was the one who was talking about the need to fix Social Security. He was the one with the health care plan that would not have worked because it did not have an individual mandate. The good news is that the actual plan we got was Hillary Care, not Obamacare, and it's not the plan anyone would have devised from scratch, but it is working. So this is continuity. So I've actually followed almost the opposite trajectory. I was extremely worried about Obama in 2008 for exactly the reasons that you complain of now, that it was clear that he had no idea what was coming. He didn't know the nature of the right wing he was going to confront. And John Edwards, well, that was I guess that was a story that we didn't, nobody saw that one coming. But Hillary Clinton, if nothing else, did know what she was going to run into. And so Obama did walk into this buzzsaw pretty much unprepared and spent about 3 years still trying to find that bipartisanship, the people of goodwill across the aisle, and only now really has he figured out there aren't any. And so that's been that was a major problem. But I have now moved somewhat in the opposite direction, not in my views of what he should do or of what his problems were in 2009, 2010, but at this point, we have to look at what has been accomplished. If you grade it against what we should be doing, we're very, very far short. And I'm actually surprised. I would have thought that the overriding issue is actually environment. And compare. I have a feeling that future historians will see that, the failure to do anything about climate change, as our greatest sin, if there are any future historians, because it's that bad a sin. But within the realm of political possibility, a lot has been accomplished. So let me run through, first of all, 2009, and then take a step back and ask some broader questions. So right then, Obama, actually before he's come into office, Obama is preparing, the transition team is there. And there are two big questions, one of which is the size of stimulus, size and duration, how big is it going to be? And the other is dealing with the banks. And on both of those, Obama whiffed to some extent. The stimulus, it was not hard to see that it should have been a lot bigger. And some of the people on his own team said that. And now there's a lot of, there's a big debate about whether he could have gotten more. And we don't really know the answer to that, although my suspicion is he could have gotten more had he tried. He conceded a lot of ground beforehand. And he did so, the stories they now tell is, it was all political realism. That's not true. There were substantial numbers of people inside his inner circle who generally thought that we didn't want too big a stimulus, who were worried about scaring the markets. And they were the people who he turned to. I mean, during the 2008 primary, people would say to me, oh, we can't have Hillary. She'll just bring in all those Rubin types. And Obama brought in all those Rubin types to make policy. And that was definitely a problem. Now, so he probably could have gotten something several $100 billion bigger, something that had substantially more infrastructure spending in it. And that would have helped. It would have helped both. The economy would have been stronger. The 2010 election would have been less of a disaster because the economy was stronger. Probably not decisive. Could he have gotten $2 trillion, which was really what we should have had, $2 trillion and a program to extend for 4 years? Probably not. That just was not going to make it through Congress. So he could have gotten something that would have significantly helped, but probably not decisively. On the banks, yes, I think, I made that case. I made it in public. I made it in the White House, actually. I got to have meetings with Obama and company. Joe Stiglitz and I went in to do that, and we made the case for temporary receivership of Citigroup and Bank of America, mainly, partly just to encourage the others, for you historians there, and lost the argument. We lost the argument in part because it was actually hard. It turns out that it's a little trickier than you think. We did not, in 2009, have a clear legal authority to seize a complicated financial institution. Anything that's FDIC insured, the law is clear. The FDIC just moves in. But Citigroup is a much more complicated thing. I thought it could have been done all the same. It could have been done. Actually, I wanted to use the Vito Corleone strategy. You just say to the stock, an offer you can't refuse. Say to the stockholders, here's $2 billion for your worthless bank. Take it or we will destroy you. It probably could have been done, but it was not easy. So it was tricky, but it was also the case, again, that there were factions that had the president's ear. It was very clear that it wasn't that Obama just chose the wrong people. It was that he was that kind of person, that he and Tim Geithner had a lot of natural rapport. You could see that in every meeting. So, okay, all of this is true. Where I think I have a really big problem is that in the view that this would have changed everything. That if a harder line had been taken against the banks, that the Tea Party rise would never have happened, that there would have been a great groundswell of support for progressive causes, that everything would have been different. I think it's very difficult for those of us who are in the trade of writing, who are in the trade of doing policy analysis and all this, to understand how little attention most people pay, how little they know. That if you think that the public is going to be moved by a change in the way you handle banks. You're presuming, first of all, that people are going to understand, are even going to know about it, let alone that they're going to interpret it the right way. The reason, when Rick Santelli gave the famous Tea Party speech that gave the name to the party, it was a rant about all this aid being given to basically to minority, to non-white home borrowers. There never has been any significant aid given to those people. But ask the public if they know that. They don't. Actually, there's some recent polling that say that a large majority of Medicare recipients do not believe that they are the beneficiaries of any government program. So you really want to think about how this works. People have impressions, they have views, but there's a lot of there's a lot of inertia. I think if there is a large part of the American public that is very conservative or something. They're very hostile to government because they think government takes their money and gives it to those people. They're very hostile. Also, by the way, they believe that government takes a lot of their money and gives it to foreigners. I mean, when the public surveys say that people think that about 20% of the federal budget goes on foreign aid. It's actually well under 1%, and it's not just ignoramuses who believe that. My medical specialist the other day was ranting about all that money we give away in foreign aid. I mean, this is somebody who's, I hope he knows what he's doing in terms of the other stuff. But and even dramatic events, they may move the polls for a little while, even for a few years, but not that much. So let me take the example of 9/11. So Bush shoots up to 80% popularity, and then it's a fairly steep downward slope inexorably thereafter. You cannot see, when you look at that downward slope, anything about events. Not until Katrina is there anything that any specific event that actually really seems to make a big dent. It's just that this was artificial. Although there are a lot of Americans who are inherently want to be conservative, who feel that the government is stealing their hard-earned dollars and giving it to you-know-who, it's only a part of the public. And the public Republicans are no more able to establish a permanent change in the public perception through events than Democrats are. So I guess I just don't buy. I mean, I was tearing my hair out very publicly in 2009 about Obama giving in too much, and he continued to. I mean, he allowed himself, because it was the kind of person he was, to get sucked into this phony bipartisanship about budgets and the grand bargain on the deficit, which was all really, really bad stuff. And I have to say, we were quite fortunate that the Republicans were so insanely committed to not giving not giving a dime in revenues, that we avoided having what really would have been a disastrous grand bargain. And I faulted a lot. I was very, very unhappy with all of that. But if we think that Obama could have achieved, he could certainly have wrecked things by giving in on those things. But if you think that he could have achieved a lot more, most of what we know about politics, most of what we know about political economy says no. He could have done better, but maybe not that much. To really have transformed the scene, I mean, I would love to believe that things like that are possible, but I think they're not. Even FDR, bear in mind, FDR, who had vastly more favorable fundamentals, because the Great Depression was vastly worse. Sad to say, because we didn't let our banking system collapse this time, because we already had a large federal government that provides strong automatic stabilizers. The unemployment insurance, food stamps, the fact that Social Security and Medicare keep on coming even when you're in a slump. So we did not have a depression as bad as the 30s, which meant that the chance for a big progressive moment was never as great as it was in the 30s. And also timing. If FDR had been elected 6 months earlier, he would have ended up being blamed for the continuation of the Depression. His timing, as it turned out, was impeccable. He took office just as the economy was turning anyway, whereas Obama was really about a year too early for that. And so there's a large element of contingency. Again, should have done much more. 2009, and to some extent up through 2011, was a very frustrating time. But I'm not sure that we would be in a very different place right now had it been different. Then the question is, well, where are we now? And here I want to step back a little bit further. For me, 2005 was a very big year. 2005 was the year that George Bush, having been elected, having run I like to say, having run as America's defender against gay married terrorists, then said, and now I have a mandate to privatize Social Security. And it turned out, no, he didn't, and that failed pretty fast. It might have gone wrong had Democrats caved, but they did not. Nancy Pelosi saved Social Security. And then the question became, okay, liberals like you, we know what you're against, what are you for? And that's where there was a kind of a process of forming an agenda. If you read my old book, Conscience of a Liberal, that was what I was saying, but it's what a lot of other people were saying too. And the starting point was health insurance, health care. If you're looking for what is the biggest thing that every other advanced country has and we do not, but also something that can, over time, transform perceptions about what we can do to help less fortunate people in our society, the place to go was healthcare. Look for health reform. And there was this, actually, from my point of view, almost a miracle in the 2008 primary, where from being something that only a fairly small number of Democrats advocated, universal health insurance of some form became a mandatory thing for any contender for the Democratic nomination to advocate. And the fact of the matter is, we got it. It's not the system anyone would have designed from scratch. It is, camel is a horse designed by a committee. It's a Rube Goldberg device. Although in some ways they're for cynical reasons, but also for less cynical reasons. You had to do a health reform the way it looks, partly because you had to buy off the insurance companies, leave a role for them, but also partly because the public is conservative in a non-left-right sense, but simply reluctant to see big changes unless they feel the need. And most people still have adequate insurance through their employers. So you had to have a system that allowed them to keep that kind of insurance, which meant that you were going to produce this kind of weird hybrid of subsidies and mandates and so on. Should have been a public option. That was the raw power of the insurance industry that stopped that. But it's the real thing. I like, if you can watch the signing ceremony, and Joe Biden can be heard audibly saying, "This is a big fucking deal," which it was. And for all of the craziness of it, at this point already, about 16 million people who would not have had health insurance now have it. That's a lot, and to dismiss that, as some people do, because it's a lousy system, because it gives the insurance companies a role, is, I think, something that it reflects a failure of imagination, a failure to understand what it's like to be typically a young working American without health insurance, which is who the uninsured mostly are. That's a very big deal. There will be another 10 million or so at least. And I have to say, although I'm a single payer guy, I want it very much. If you could do it, we should just have Medicare for all. This is a system that is more expensive, less efficient. It's not as much more expensive as expected. It's one of those stories, there's other polling. The vast majority of people who have an opinion at all believe that Obamacare is costing much more than predicted. In fact, it's costing much less than predicted. It turns out that by setting these rules, you create effective competition among insurance companies for the first time ever, and that is holding down premiums pretty well. That's a big deal. Banks, bailout, I wanted strings attached. Mainly on the bailout itself, I wanted taxpayers to have a share in the upside. Instead of heads we win, heads the banks win, tails the taxpayers lose. Instead, that's not what happened. Now, as it turned out, for the most part, the amount of money lost in the bailout after the fact is not large. They haven't gotten it all back, but it's not large. It turns out that in the crisis, in the depths of the crisis, things like subprime mortgage-backed securities were actually undervalued. So when the banks were bailed out and stability started to come, those things came back. So it turned out that it was not as bad a deal as you might have thought, but of course we missed the chance to lay down an example, and yes, prosecutions. I would have loved to see prosecutions. And again, now, but if you think that the public would have really rallied, I'm not sure. I mean, it would have been worth trying, but what we got in terms of financial reform is well short of what you should have, but not trivial at all. If it were trivial, the banks wouldn't be lobbying so frantically to try and get it unwound. There are things in there. There's the creation of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Elizabeth Warren thing, which is turning out to be way more effective than many people, including myself, thought it would be. There's resolution authority. This time around, the authority to seize Citigroup will be there. That's a big deal. There's some other stuff which is more dubious, but it's not as big a deal as health reform, but it's significant. Environment, well, nothing done until now, but Obama is now trying to use executive orders, so we'll see whether he sticks with that. Let me say where I think Tom and I share very much this concern, which is that there is a role in democratic administrations of self-proclaimed centrists, self-proclaimed experts who are really basically not, first of all, not in fact experts, they only think they are, and who do put a big brake on progressive ideas. So I think I stole the phrase from the blogger HUS, but you've probably seen very serious people, VS, capital V, capital S, capital P. I use that a lot. There are these groups that still have a lot of sway in the Democratic Party, in Democratic White Houses, who are financial types, who are, and they have a fixation on deficits. They say, oh, don't be too hard on errant bankers. I think the influence of those people is a little bit, there is raw political corruption, quite a lot, more than we like to acknowledge. Go back to the Bush, the Medicare Part D. I mean, the fact that the guy, Billy Taussig, who put it together, then immediately resigned from Congress, became the chief of the Pharmaceutical Lobbying Association for $2 million a year. There is that kind of thing happens quite a lot. I think what went on with Obama is something somewhat different. Not so much that the administration was bought as that here come these impressive looking people, and one thing about Wall Street actually, as opposed to a lot of energy industry or something, Wall Street, they actually tend to be smart and funny and well-spoken and have great tailors, and they do come across a lot more persuasive than even smart college professors, and even more so than labor leaders who are not, don't cut that kind of figure in a country which has lost the cultural appreciation for labor, and that has been an ongoing problem, and it's a very serious one. I think, however, that Obama has learned quite a lot from that experience, and so have others. I believe, and now I may be doing wishful thinking, like all the people in 2008 who thought that Obama was was really going to be a savior. I believe that if a Democrat is the next president, that she will. Realistically, actually, even if Elizabeth Warren is somehow persuaded to jump in, but anyway, that he or she, but probably she, will not be as willing to listen to the advice of the very serious people as the last one. The general public learns a lot less from events than you'd like to imagine, because people don't know, they change memories. People believe that the TARP, the major slug, they believed that was Obama's, and it wasn't. It was actually introduced in the waning days of the Bush administration. But the elite is pays more attention to these things, are political junkies, and so I think we have a better chance of doing this right. I'm grading on a curve, obviously. If we're looking at what I wanted to have happen, if we look at at where I would like us to be right now, we're very far away. If I look, so my point of reference is if I think about where we are compared with election night 2004, which is when I was reading Tom Frank about what's the matter with Kansas and thinking that we really are totally doomed, I can make myself pretty happy. Leave it at that.
That's true. That's true. That was
a dark time. So, I guess we have an unstructured dialogue for a little while. And then
and then you guys get in, okay? But the very serious people. So this is, it's not the term I use, but I've written about these people. I mean, this is the culture of Washington, D.C. And I'll never forget the first time I heard that everyone in Washington knows what the problem is. The problem is always entitlements. As soon as someone says that, they always, you know what's going to come out of their mouth next. The problem is entitlements, and we have to figure out a way to reform entitlements, and everyone knows this. And it's just a matter of the two parties coming together, and doing what everyone knows to be correct. And there's all sorts of different phrases that they have in Washington for something that the consensus agrees upon. Okay, so I've been writing about the Bill Clinton administration recently, and back then there was this term, this is the 90s, right? They'd use this term no-brainer all the time.
Oh, yeah.
The other one I loved was when they overturned Glass-Steagall, they would always say, when they were deregulating the banking industry, and they would say, well, those are Depression-era laws. And that was supposed to be enough by itself, right? That's like, those are old laws. They're dusty, you know? It's time to get some new laws in there. And that didn't work out so well. But you can find this, by the way, in there's certain journalists that really embody this attitude. And there's Bob Woodward. Well, I've never met him in person, but one of his books, he basically comes right out and says it's a book about Obama's search for the grand bargain. And he says, this is something that all right-thinking people, I'm butchering the quote here, but all right-thinking people in American politics know that this is what we have to have. And it's just the stupid partisanship that keeps us apart.
No, this is definitely, lately I've been calling it Bull Simpsonism with one as one word, and sure, really remarkable how for a while, not just that this was what everybody knows, but that journalists would completely drop even the pretense of objectivity. Bowles would give a speech about cutting entitlements, and reporters, not pundits, but reporters would stand up and say, "How can we help?"
God.
And
that's
so no. This is a very it's awesome, so I've actually been obsessing a little bit. The point is, it's not irreversible, or you can fight it. Maybe you can't completely win, or maybe you can do only no more than a rearguard action, but you can fight it. That in the U.S. we have in fact somewhat pushed back that consensus. Not nearly enough, but it's not what everybody knows anymore. I think ridicule is helpful. Constantly reiterating that it's wrong, and you can actually see. I've been paying some attention right now to Britain, where there has been essentially no dent in the similar consensus. That in Britain, the idea that fiscal profligacy is the source of all their problems, which makes no sense at all, given what actually happened, and that the budget deficit is the most important issue in an economy which has actually had the worst, a worse slump and slower recovery than it did in the 1930s. And it is what everyone knows. Reporters, not reporters from the BBC will say our most important problem is the deficit, and labor needs to come clean on that. But now the question is, why are we're in better shape on that here, is the point. That there's a fair bit of questioning. And I think that owes to a variety of things. It doesn't hurt that Alan Simpson it doesn't take very long to make him into a ludicrous figure. Just have to quote him a few times.
Now, come on. Back in the 90s, people thought he was pretty awesome.
I know.
He was the straight-shooting Alan Simpson, always ready with a witty quote.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of... he's now become a definite, you could get off my lawn type, who at the drop of a hat will start into a complaint about young people and their culture. That I think it needs to be disseminated as often as possible. The thing about all these kids listening to...
Wait, do you remember that the Reagan administration, they thought the Beach Boys were like a little too outre? The Beach Boys were...
Oh, wait, so... Give me a second here. So I mean, Alan Simpson was the kids all listening to Snoopy, Snoopy Poop Dog and the Enema Man. Think about that for a second. I actually... But did you see Ted Cruz?
I haven't seen it. It's been around on TV. No.
Oh, no, I don't really see. I don't watch TV. Only if something shows up on YouTube, then I'll watch it. I can't stand to watch political TV. But Ted Cruz says that he gave up rock for country music after 9/11 to be patriotic.
Really?
Yeah, you really could not make up a lot of what goes on in America.
Oh my God, yeah, that's awesome. But okay, back to the consensus in Washington, capital C consensus.
Right.
And believe me, it exists and it is everywhere and you run into it all the time. But I have found, just in my own personal experience, that this is more a problem of Democrats than of Republicans. The Democrats, so we talk about Obama's his search for bipartisanship, his quest for the grand bargain. And yes, he did talk that language all the time at the time. I remember his great rise to prominence was at the 2004 convention where he gave a speech that there is no red America, there is no blue America, we are, whatever it is. We're the United States of America. And he was beloved for this, but in my bullshit detector, I was just I tuned all that out. I didn't even hear it. And then when he came to office, it was so astonishing to me that that's what he meant. I thought that was just every president says that. Every candidate says that. But he meant the bullshit. And then the real stuff that I liked about him, he was going to renegotiate NAFTA and he was going to start enforcing antitrust again. And there was this whole list he did actually have a list of progressive things that he was going to do. And it's that was just forgotten. That was just brushed aside in his quest for something that is the DC consensus. But here's what I want to get at. That so much of this, for me, goes back to the monopoly nature of the two-party system. And you have these two parties acting like two actors in a cartel. The Democrats are like Archer Daniels Midland, right? They're always reaching out across the table to fix prices. Yeah. Let's get us a grand bargain. And the Republicans play it in a completely different way. They're like, no, I can make you do what I want by becoming ever more extreme. And they actually say this. So if you go back and look at Tom DeLay's memoirs, he talks about basically playing Bill Clinton because he knew that Clinton was always going to be, doing this outreach thing. And he's like, so we just kept moving the goalposts. We just kept going, start as extreme as we could.
Well, no, but then the question is, what do you do about that? And I guess part of what you do is you celebrate the achievements that you get. Part of it is that you have to be willing to primary Democrats who are not really. It's funny. Why don't we talk? There is a term. There's rhinos and dinos. Republicans in name only and Democrats in name only, but the Democrats almost never go after their dinos, except they're starting to right now. And by the way, if we're talking about Rahm Emanuel,
he's in big trouble.
He's in big trouble. Yeah. It turns out that
back in my adopted former hometown.
Yeah. So, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing whether or not, in a way, it's a good thing whether or not the other guy wins, and if Emanuel is defeated, almost regardless of what happens afterwards, I think there has to be some political sanction. After all, that is where the Republicans, the hard right turn is pushed on them. Not all of them not all of the current members of the Senate on the Republican side would, by the nature of their personalities, or probably what they believe privately, be as extreme as they are in public. They're pushed there by the fact that the base will kick them out if they don't sound that.
Or it's an act. So this gets us back to the Tea Party movement, and I think so I was studying these guys at the time when this happened. So I'm a like you, student of the 1930s. But for me, it's the literature, right? We were talking about this earlier. I collect proletarian fiction, and I read Edmund Wilson and H.L. Mencken, and it's a curious hobby, but that's me. And so when it happened again this time around, I was getting all these old books off the shelf and reading, reportage about strikes and protests in the 30s. Yeah. And it's going to happen again. This is 2008, 2009, and I'm saying this is going to happen again. And finally, I had asked basically everybody I know, tell me when you get, I want to go and see the protest with my own eyes. And one of my friends calls me up. This is about a week after the Santelli rant, and he says, it's here. It's down, and it's going to happen tomorrow at Lafayette Park in Washington. And I went down there, and it was the first Tea Party rally. Right. And it was, I made fun of it in the newspaper. I thought it was ridiculous. I laughed at them, because it was all these lobbyists. It was people people who were at CPAC, and they came up from CPAC, they were wearing their name tags. They still had their name tags on. And it was like guys from Grover's outfit and guys from Newt Gingrich's outfit. And it was such a put on, it was obvious. And I made fun of it in the paper, but I'll be damned if that thing didn't catch on. And you think about, you think about when it caught on and the timing of this. And this didn't occur to me until a long time later when I started watching Glenn Beck obsessively. But there was this moment when the right figured out how to start. You remember the AIG bailouts? And then the bonuses. The bonuses were the thing where the public just, people were so angry. People were furious. Do you remember this? The very division that had tanked the economy at AIG got these, these very extravagant bonuses. And everyone was furious. And I was watching Glenn Beck at the time, and he went from the day before, not quite, but sort of defending them, saying, you shouldn't be angry at these guys, to the next day trying to blame it on Democrats. And they figured this out, and they ran with it. And that was the moment when, when sort of the valence of the anger changed.
See, I think events are a lot less decisive on that. And the reason that the Santelli rant worked is that a lot of people are predisposed to that you are never been able to get people as excited about white-collar crime as about, black skin crime, right? It's,
okay.
It just isn't, there's a...
But they did emphasize the balance. They played it very well.
They were able to.
They would always change it slightly, right? It's like they would make the bailouts mesh with their libertarian view of the world,
right? It becomes I would have liked to see a lot more. A lot more explicit populism, and I hope that we will get that. And Democrats do sheer away from that part.
Remember what you said at the time. The Democrats have a kind of allergy to it.
Yeah.
They don't like populism. It's not instinctictive to them anymore. I was talking in my introduction about Bryan, Roosevelt, Truman, and you go back further, Andrew Jackson, Van Buren. Populism used to be like deep in the Democratic grain. This is who they were. Even Bill Clinton could really turn it on, but it's now as though they all want to be Michael Dukakis, right? That's the ideal Democratic figure. They can't hit those notes anymore.
And some of it, again, and this is where the unknown. What if Obama were better at that sort of thing? He gives great high-minded speeches, but obviously his instincts are not for that kind of. Down and dirty, these are bad guys, we got to take them on. I have to say, especially wearing the couple of hats I do, I find myself sometimes in these meetings of sympathetic economists with the president, and wearing my non-Times hat, and occasionally some muttering, he's more professorial than we are.
Well, do you remember what Larry Summers said? And by the way, this gets at the heart of what I think is wrong with the Democratic Party. Larry Summers said, he was talking about the transition from Bush to Obama, and he said we've gone from the least social science-oriented administration to the most social science-oriented administration. But social science isn't what was called for at the moment,
No.
Okay, you have to have some, but...
Yeah. Actually, I've known Larry Summers my entire life, and he's a lot...
entire life?
My entire adult life.
Okay. Since
grad school. And but he sounds a whole lot more populist now. So there is an evolution
It's
going
ironic.
on.
We're living
He's
in
actually
ironic
been
times.
staking out some positions to my left lately.
With that hopeful note, I think we should
Yeah.
open the floor to questions.
Yeah.
Hi. On a populist note, my name's Alex Vitale. I'm chair of the faculty union chapter here at Brooklyn College. Yay! Thank you. And as many of you in the room know, we've been over 5 years without a contract, and some of my colleagues are distributing some information about the sad state of affairs. And my question has to do with Cuomo's presidential aspirations. For those who don't know, Cuomo appears to have staked himself in the national debate as someone who is willing to crush public sector workers and their unions, not unlike the Scott Walker and some of the Republican candidates. Fair enough. And that he has also decided to position himself as an enemy of public education through support of charter schools,
Okay. So the question is
underfunding. Well, I just have a couple more minutes here. I'm speaking on behalf of a number of people in the room, and I do have a question about Cuomo. But very good. You know, Cuomo's campaign was funded almost entirely by the hedge fund managers. There was an excellent piece in The Nation that outlined this, so that he has decided that somehow this is an appropriate strategy for putting yourself on the national stage. So we're considering, you know, bringing a resolution of no confidence in his choice of board members to run CUNY, who are also basically tied to these hedge fund managers and union lawyers and people like that. So if you could just say something about, for Mr. Krugman, your potential new home, forthcoming new home, and this idea of Cuomo positioning himself so far to the right. Thank you.
Okay, let me say, so I haven't, sad to say the contract issue is new to me, so I should just hold off and do my homework. On Cuomo, so you know there is a rule for the Times, which is that columnists cannot endorse or cannot tell you how to vote in an election. So you have no idea which political party I support. And, so I can't actually, you know, so I have to be a little cautious in wording here, but I have to say, what a bizarre time in American history to decide that being the second coming of the, you know, the late Clinton years or Blairism in Britain, of light touch regulation, friendly to Wall Street, and let's be really harsh on labor. What a bizarre time to be making that the strategy of your, you know, what is America's social democratic party, which is the Democrats. It seems to me is almost something. It's both, you know, not the direction we should be going, and it even strikes me as being politically incredibly stupid. Who's going to vote for that? If people want to crush unions, they're going to vote for the real thing.
Well, tell me something. What the history of the Democrats in Wall Street? When did this really take off?
There's actually, as I understand it, there's more than you think even in the 30s. That high finance has always been more closely tied to Democrats than you think. That the FDR had his bankers, it wasn't a big deal until the financial sector began exploding in size. So in 1980, Wall Street was a relatively small force in the economy and in politics.
Yeah.
Then it exploded, partly due to financial deregulation, partly due to failure to expand regulation as the financial system got more complex. And it has been, traditionally, since then, Wall Street was surprisingly favorable to Democrats. Securities industry has always tended to give a surprising share of, not an overwhelming majority, but often half or a bit more to Democrats. I think
Obama was the first, in a way, to get more than they are.
Right. Although that was possibly because he was clearly going to win.
Yeah.
You should always take that
That's
into
right.
account. But, and I think that actually has something to do with cultural affinity, with location. You know, Wall Street is in New York, picks up a little bit of the city's tinge, social liberalism. Now the thing is, all of that has gone away now. That Wall Street, if you look at Wall Street's contributions between the parties in recent years, it looks like the coal industry. They've decided that people who are going to tax them or regulate them are not their friends. But that's, I think, and the point, of course, is Democrats then were co-opted. I think not for the most part crude corruption, but rather co-option, and there is the revolving door, and it's just...
Oh, speaking of that, you gave one of the classic examples in the Bush administration. Yeah. Do you ever think of the Bob Rubin example?
Oh, I know.
Well, no, the people need to remember this. He comes out of Goldman, works for the is head of the Treasury Department, deregulates the financial industry, runs a bunch of bailouts, and then goes back to Citi.
Well, or Peter Orszag, who I know, and I don't think is a corrupt bone in his body. Nonetheless, he goes from running OMB to working for Citi. But
Citi was also the great beneficiary of the repeal of Glass-Steagall. This was the company that...
Citi has, there's a long history there. Yeah, I know, we have many questions. Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
we should shut up.
No, not shut up, but just let him say something.
Yeah.
Mr. Krugman, Mr. Frank, on the subject of Obama's legacy, it is no question he was subjected to so much hate and disrespect from the other side. For example, heckling at the State of the Union, you lie, clapping when he said, I have no more campaigns to run, among other things. And the right wing loves to discredit him for his accomplishments, that I disagree with. But they claim that the reason the unemployment rate went down to 5.5%, he inherited 10-point-something%, is because people stopped looking for work. How would you counter-argue that?
Okay, you want to do the numbers. Some of it has happened, right? If you actually ask, look at labor force participation rates, they are down. A fair bit of that is demography. The population is getting older. Some of it is not. There's lots of work on this. But I think the thing to say is, look at not the unemployment rate, but at job creation. So I have a favorite quote, although there are many like it, but Rand Paul saying, when was the last time the economy added millions of jobs? It was under Ronald Reagan. Which is actually, if you say, if adding millions of jobs means adding at least 2 million in a given year, it's actually happened 13 times since Reagan left office, all 8 years of Clinton, 2 years under Bush, and at this point, 3 years under Obama. I mean, the job creation in 2014 was the best since 1999. So what's happening now is not people leaving the labor force. What's happening now is a genuine economic recovery. I don't think Obama did that, but remember, 2014 was also the first full year of implementation of Obamacare, which was supposed to destroy the economy, and instead we had 3.3 million jobs. I think that's pretty good. Yeah.
We have another question?
Yes, hi. I'm an admirer of both the gentlemen that have spoken today. I'm a big fan of Mr. Krugman. I read the Times regularly, and I was interested in David Axelrod recently came out with a memoir of his times of the Obama administration, and he cited that Obama is fond of reading the New York Times, and he likes to read his two favorite columnists. And,
Let me guess.
And his two favorite columnists are Tom Friedman and David Brooks.
I got it.
Yeah, we know that.
And I was wondering how that, when Mr. Krugman heard that, how he felt about that.
That's priceless.
But the bigger thing, the bone that I have to pick with Mr. Krugman is that I think he goes light on Mr. Obama, because I think you've been right pretty much since I've been reading you about the Bush administration, about bailouts, about the financial situation, about the world economy. And for a learned man like Mr. Obama, who turns, he turns to the Times every day, and he ignores reading your columns, and he doesn't acknowledge that you've been right all these times? It seems to me that he's covering up for a system that's sort of fascistic, where the money really runs the system. And how dangerous, how close do you think that we are to a fascistic system?
Okay, so first of all, the question was not, does he pay attention? The question was, what does he like? So he probably doesn't like me very much.
Why?
I gave him a really hard time in 2008. I was effectively, given Times rules, not explicitly, but I was effectively saying, do not nominate this guy. He remembers that. I gave him a really hard time in 2009 over the policy. So, I don't think you can find anything comparable in Tom Friedman. He doesn't write that kind of column. And David Brooks is, that's still the reaching across the aisle thing.
Everyone loves David Brooks.
Well, David is a great writer, very moderate in his tone, says lots of sensible things, is open-minded, except when it matters. But the White House has done a lot of cultivating of David. They've had way more meetings with him than with me, but that's because they thought that they could swing him, and they in a way, it's almost a compliment that they don't feel that there's much point in trying to butter me up.
Do you think fascism is overstated, or do you think that we're really living in a pseudo-fascistic economic system?
If we had real fascism, you would know it. I mean, this is...
well, we wouldn't be doing this.
We wouldn't be doing this.
I mean, you talked about Rubin and Citigroup and this and that. I mean...
Excessive influence. Actually, let me give a plug to Thomas Piketty. He has there's lots of stuff in his book, Capital in the 21st Century, but one of the things that I found revelatory, just because it was stuff I don't know, was his talking about Belle Epoque France, which was a genuine democracy, universal suffrage, strong commitment to the ideals of openness, free speech, and yet, in fact, hereditary wealthy dynasties controlled all of politics. So that wasn't fascist. You could say whatever you liked, but it wasn't...
what about oligarchy?
It was an oligarchy. No, are we an oligarchy? Oh yeah, for sure. So that's a very different thing.
No, that's crushing.
But there are oligarchies that are permeable, where you can still sometimes make a change, which we did in some important ways, and oligarchies that don't. And there are oligarchies that routinely torture and assassinate domestic political opponents, and we're not one of those. So, again, I'm grading on a curve, but clearly, you just don't want to be. Don't overstate, because you don't want to minimize what a real fascist regime, which is not impossible, what that would look like. If that comes, you will really notice the difference.
Thank you.
Welcome to Brooklyn College. I'm a senior here. And as a student, I voted for Obama because he ran on a platform of change in Washington, which you're saying is a hubris. So would you both agree that his epic failure is getting his Yes We Can candidate Obama conflicted with the President Obama?
Well, that was always a pipe dream. And it was a pipe dream that did some damage because he spent a fair bit of time, some political capital, trying to make that pipe dream come true. But gosh, that was not...
But there's two different dreams here. There's one way of changing Washington, which is the consensus way. Let's all get together and let's reach across the aisle and let's finally achieve bipartisan consensus. And that's really the dream that you come across all the time in that city. But there is another dream of changing Washington that I just described earlier, that, change it my way, I'd like to see that. And I, stupidly, no, I shouldn't say that. I thought that, I thought that there was a reason to expect that kind of thing. And, frankly, I had my eyes open about Obama. I also thought that historical events would force his hand. I mean, you can put whoever you want in the White House. They're going to have to deal with any Democrat. They're going to have to deal with the banks in the way that I described. And he worked so hard to resist doing that. That was amazing. So the way I always put it is, looking at it from a historical point of view, is that we came to a turning point in this country in 2008 and 2009, and we didn't turn. We didn't make the turn. Instead, he worked so hard to prop up that old system and give us back status quo ante with a few modifications.
But let me actually say another word about grading on a curve. Think about, I do international, I'm a ruthless cosmopolitan, whatever, so I tend to think of international comparisons a lot, and the U.S. Democratic Party is essentially a social democrats. It's equivalent to, so lots of parties have different names, but they all effectively are, somewhat bigger welfare state, et cetera, or at least defending the welfare state. And of the leaders of such parties across the Western world, Obama has actually had the stiffest spine. Mm-hmm. So if you were going to compare Obama with Miliband in Britain, or Hollande, Jesus.
But all of these countries are, to some degree, the left parties are having the same problem ours is.
Yeah.
The Democrats, where they don't know what they're about. They have no reason. I mean, look at they just could not find a response to this, to the disaster.
But that's in a way saying that it's less the person.
They've lost track of their roots. They don't know why they're there. It's every time you meet these people, they're they're just lost.
Yeah. But that's saying that it is something deeper than one individual. Yeah. That it's not just Obama. There's something that there's a longer-term process by which the center left or whatever has lost touch with its roots, and I'm all for trying to change that. But I think that's going to take more than one guy.
What about third-party movements?
The trouble is, they can all too easily deliver too much power. Yeah. They can be spoilers. I mean, think about.
Okay, but this is a system of law in this country. The two-party system is basically locked in legally, and I mean, it's not directly, but indirectly. But they've set the rules of the game in a certain way, and. In the 19th century, I should shut up. This is my hobby horse, right? I love populism. I'm always like, why can't we have that again? Why can't we have third-party movements? Well, you guys have heard me for a whole week now, 4 days. You've heard this many times.
Hi. It's a great honor to get to ask my question to you guys. I really am a fan of both of you, and I appreciate you voicing, the voice of, reason and the popular media. We were talking earlier about Obama and unable to capitalize on, the early part, especially of his term, when he had the House and the Senate, in his favor. It reminded me of the discussion we had about FDR, where he arguably was one of the great, most powerful presidents we ever had, because he did have such a political context to work within. But even and FDR did capitalize on the first 100 days. But even with that, it seems like the Depression was really ended by the Second World War more so than the New Deal. So in a way, it's like it almost seems like even in our best possible scenario, we cannot muster enough to create enough stimulus to actually create a change. When we have depression, recession like this. So I feel like maybe it says something structurally about the country or culturally. I'd be curious what you guys think about that.
Okay, nobody has ever been able to get sustained public support for fiscal stimulus. The public does not get Keynesian economics. If you look at polling from 1936, the public overwhelmingly wanted to balance the budget. And FDR actually tried to give it to them, which led to the 37 recession, which caused the New Deal to lose all of its political steam. And then World War II came along. And so, I have this proposal that we need to fake a threat of alien invasion in order to get an effective fiscal stimulus. But
that said, 33, 34, 35, this is some of the biggest growth ever.
There's a very rapid growth taking place over those, over the 4 years from the depths of the Depression onwards, which is only a little bit from fiscal stimulus. It is some. It's also that there was a somewhat different recession. There was a lot of just bounce back from the extreme problems that had happened. And, but FDR did, he screwed up on that. So the New Deal, but left a significant legacy. You don't want to call the New Deal a failure. And also, incomplete stuff can set the stage eventually for much more. I actually do. I teach a course which I'm going to port over to CUNY on the economics of the welfare state. And one of the things I'd like to talk about is is the evolution of Social Security. So the original Social Security covered only about half the workforce. And it excluded service workers, it excluded agricultural workers, it was, and actually if you look at how it was designed, not a coincidence, it basically covered only white workers. But that system eventually became the Social Security we have now, which is the bulwark of, it is the thing that keeps older Americans out of financial desperation, and it is pretty much universal. So don't have to get it 100% right. Even if you get it 50% right, then over time you can make it better.
WPA built Brooklyn College. Don't forget that when you're sitting.
Yeah.
Next question.
I liked What's the Matter with Kansas. You were asking a question that nobody else was asking at the time. Lester Thoreau wrote a book about the same time, the economist from MIT, about the same time, where he looked at the economy of the United States compared with Germany and France. And he saw how in Germany and France, they designed an economic system that gives working class people without university educations a route to economic prosperity. And Germany, kept its France kept its manufacturing, whereas we just abandoned it. In the 1960s and 70s, when the Rust Belt was rusting, the Democrats, the center left that lost its roots, did nothing for these white working class people who truly suffered.
They put Volcker in there. That's exactly. I'm agreeing with you. Yeah, keep going.
And so they turned around and said, "Well, screw you. If nobody's going to support us, why should we support anybody?" The guy from the faculty senate here. There's an enormous rage in this country over public service unions because they have it made. They're just negotiating with a government, most of whom are on their side, whereas the private sector workers are down to less than 8% of the labor force.
Right, but you got to show some solidarity there. The way to get back is not to like lash out at them. It's to get that for yourself. We all.
But they don't see it. They absolutely don't see it.
I didn't catch that. They didn't.
They don't see it. They don't see how they're going to get anything out of this. It's just going to be a giveaway to the educated upper middle
I see
class.
that. I see what you're saying, and that rage is where I come from is very palpable. I mean, that anger, that fury among working class people who can see that this country is. This is why. Do you want me to stop?
I actually am.
Are we out of time?
We are out of time.
I was just going to say, this is why in the Tea Party movement, they discovered the word class. And they were using this all the time. It was basically open
really good
class
for Rick
war.
Santorum because he apparently had never heard it from his family.
He used it all the time. He was one of the guys that did. But he would flip it,
All right. Thank you. We can't thank you enough.
Okay.
He's great.
Thanks. All right.
That was terrific.
Great. Hey. Fun stuff.
That was fun.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Take care.